The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams barely noticed as he leaned closer to his monitoring station. The green glow of the thermal imaging display painted his weathered face in harsh shadows as he studied the infrared signature moving across the restricted zone. At 3:47 in the morning, the high desert of New Mexico should have been empty except for coyotes and the occasional jackrabbit. But this signature was different. Human-shaped, moving with purpose through terrain that would challenge even experienced hikers in daylight. The figure navigated rocky ridges and dense pine groves with impossible efficiency, never pausing to check directions or catch breath. Most concerning of all, they were moving at a pace that suggested military training. "Command, we have unauthorized ground movement in Sector 7, Williams reported, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the drone monitoring station. Single individual, moving northwest at approximately 5 miles per hour through restricted airspace. The response crackled through his headset immediately. Drone station Echo, maintain surveillance. Upload thermal data to tactical command. Williams had been monitoring this stretch of desert for 8 years, ever since his combat injury had moved him from active duty to surveillance operations. He'd seen plenty of lost hikers, confused civilians, and the occasional thrill seeker testing military response times. But this was different. The movement pattern was too deliberate, too precise. Whoever was out there knew exactly where they were going. The restricted zone encompassed 15 square miles of high desert terrain, officially designated as a military training preserve. But Williams knew the real reason the area remained off-limits. Years ago, before the military had acquired the property, it had served as a private training ground for special operations personnel. The kind of training that didn't appear in official records, conducted by operators whose names were never spoken aloud in regular channels. As he watched the thermal signature disappear under tree cover, only to reappear 2 kilometers further west, Williams felt a familiar chill. The movement pattern reminded him of something he'd seen before during his years in active duty. A distinctive gait, perfectly controlled, economical in every step. The kind of movement that came from training that went beyond standard military protocol. "Thermal target is evading detection," he muttered into his headset, showing advanced knowledge of surveillance countermeasures. The reply came from a different voice this time, higher ranking, more cautious. "Stand by, Echo Station. We're escalating this to Level 2 response." Williams adjusted his monitoring equipment, trying to get a clearer image of the figure moving through the darkness below. The thermal signature was small, suggesting a young person, possibly a teenager. But the movement pattern belonged to someone with years of specialized training. The contradiction bothered him more than he cared to admit. Minutes later, the radio crackled with new orders. "Echo Station, be advised. 3 Black Hawk helicopters are deploying from Fort Carson. Maintain surveillance and provide coordinates for intercept." Williams felt his stomach tighten. 3 helicopters for a single individual seemed like overkill, unless command knew something he didn't. As he tracked the figure's progress across the valley floor, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to discover something that would change everything. The thermal signature moved steadily toward the abandoned training facility at the center of the preserve. Concrete bunkers slowly crumbling in the desert heat, obstacle courses overgrown with sagebrush, firing ranges marked only by scattered shell casings and bullet-scarred targets. It was a place that held memories too dangerous for official records, a monument to operations that had never existed on paper. Williams had visited the facility once, years ago, during a routine maintenance check. The silence there had been profound, weighted with the presence of ghosts. Now, as he watched the lone figure approach that same location, he began to understand that some stories were too important to remain buried. The sound of approaching rotors echoed across the desert as 3 military helicopters closed in on their target. But Williams had a growing suspicion that the hunters were about to become the hunted, and that the girl moving through the darkness below carried a protection more powerful than any military authority. Captain Jake Rodriguez gripped the controls of the lead Blackhawk as it swept low between canyon walls, the aircraft's thermal imaging system painting the landscape in stark detail. Beside him, Lieutenant Mike Brooks studied the tactical display. With growing confusion, their target had vanished again, disappearing into what should have been open ground with nowhere to hide. "How is she doing this?" Brooks muttered, adjusting his headset as he scanned the feeds from all 3 helicopters. "She's not just avoiding us. She's predicting our flight patterns." Rodriguez had been flying military aircraft for 12 years, participating in operations across 3 continents. He tracked enemy combatants through urban warfare zones and pursued high-value targets across hostile territory. But this was different. The girl below wasn't running in panic or desperation. She was executing a coordinated evasion strategy that demonstrated intimate knowledge of helicopter pursuit tactics. "Look at this pattern," Brooks said, highlighting the target's movement on his screen. "Every time we adjust course, she's already repositioning to counter our approach vector. She's not reacting to us. She's staying 2 moves ahead." The radio crackled with updates from the other aircraft. "Lead helicopter, this is Blackhawk 2. Target has knowledge of our blind spots. Recommend upgrading threat assessment." Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. The girl they were pursuing couldn't be more than 16 or 17 years old, based on thermal analysis. But she was moving like someone with years of specialized training, the kind of education that wasn't available to civilians. "Command. This individual has advanced tactical knowledge," Rodriguez reported. "Movement suggests military or special operations background. Recommend reassessing our approach." The response came back immediately. "Negative. Maintain current orders. Subject appears to be a minor. Use minimum necessary force." But as they spread into a wide search formation, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The girl's evasion patterns weren't random or desperate. They were textbook perfect, executed with a precision that suggested she'd been trained by the best. There, Brooks pointed to his screen. Grid reference 334.7. She's moving toward the old training facility. Rodriguez studied the tactical display. The abandoned facility had been decommissioned years ago, left to decay in the desert silence. Concrete bunkers slowly crumbling, obstacle courses overgrown with desert vegetation, firing ranges marked by scattered debris. It was a place that held secrets too dangerous for official documentation. Why would she head there? Rodriguez wondered aloud. There's nothing but ruins. Maybe she knows about the underground shelters, Brooks suggested. Could be planning to wait us out. But as they closed in on the facility, Rodriguez noticed something that made his blood run cold. The girl wasn't moving defensively. She wasn't seeking shelter or trying to hide. She was moving with purpose, heading toward a specific destination. With the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. "All units, something doesn't add up here," Rodriguez commanded through the radio. "Maintain overwatch, but do not approach." This feels like more than a simple trespassing incident. The 3 helicopters formed a wide perimeter around the abandoned facility, their thermal imaging systems tracking the lone figure as she moved between the ruins. Rodriguez had seen enough tactical situations to recognize when standard protocol might not apply. There was something about this pursuit that felt wrong, like they were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Through his thermal display, he watched the girl reach the center of the facility and kneel beside a natural rock formation. Her movements were reverent, purposeful, as if she was performing some kind of ritual or ceremony. She placed something small beside the rocks, then remained motionless for several minutes. "She's not afraid of us," Brooks observed, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. "Look at her posture. She knows we're here, but she's not running." Rodriguez adjusted his flight controls, maintaining position while studying the scene. Below, the girl moved with the same calm confidence he'd seen in veteran operators, the same unshakable composure that came from years of specialized training. But she was too young to have that kind of experience unless she'd been taught by someone exceptional. "Command, request permission to access classified personnel files," Rodriguez said into his radio. "This individual may have connections to former military personnel." The radio went silent for a long moment. When the response came, it was from a different voice, higher ranking, more cautious. "Stand by. Lead helicopter. We're reviewing the situation." Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. In his years of military service, he'd learned to recognize when standard operations were about to become something much more complicated. The girl below wasn't just a lost teenager who'd wandered into restricted territory. She was something else entirely, and they were about to discover that some names carried more weight than rank. Lieutenant Brooks flipped through the onboard identification registry, his fingers dancing across the digital interface as facial recognition software churned through thousands of profiles. The forward reconnaissance drone had captured a clear image of their target during a brief moment when she'd emerged from tree cover, and something about her features had triggered an automated search through classified databases. "Too young for a mercenary, too fast for a civilian," Brooks muttered, scrolling through files of known persons of interest. Military personnel, contractors, foreign nationals, individuals flagged by various intelligence agencies. Standard protocol for any unauthorized intrusion into restricted airspace required comprehensive identification attempts. Captain Rodriguez maintained his position overhead, watching the girl through thermal imaging as she completed whatever ritual had brought her to this remote location. Her movements remained calm and deliberate, showing no signs of panic despite 3 military helicopters circling overhead. Most civilians would have been terrified by now, but she seemed almost indifferent to their presence. Suddenly, the identification screen froze. The artificial intelligence had registered a partial match with a heavily redacted legacy profile buried deep in classified archives. The file appeared on Brooks' display, but most of the information was blacked out, accessible only to personnel with the highest security clearances. "What's that?" Rodriguez asked, glancing over from his pilot controls. Brooks squinted at the display, his blood running cold as he read the limited information available. The file didn't list her name. That field was completely redacted. It showed only a single relation line: daughter of operator 001, call sign Stonefield. "You're kidding me," Brooks whispered, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. Rodriguez nearly lost control of the aircraft. "Say that again. Call sign Stonefield. She's his daughter." The radio chatter across all 3 helicopters fell silent. Every pilot, every crew member, every tactical operator knew that call sign, even though the man's real name was never spoken aloud in official channels. He was a ghost from the special operations community, a legend whose missions were never recorded in public databases, who had trained Tier 1 units in techniques that officially didn't exist. Stonefield had been the kind of operator whose existence was whispered about in secure facilities, whose methods were studied but never documented, whose legacy lived on in the skills he passed down to others. He'd served in every major conflict over the past 2 decades, training elite units in survival, evasion, and unconventional warfare. His memorial service had been held in secret, with only 2 generals present and no media coverage. "Command, we have a situation," Rodriguez reported carefully. Target has been identified as family of a former operator. Specify, came the immediate response. Operator 001, call sign Stonefield. The radio went silent for a full 30 seconds. When command responded, the voice was different. Higher ranking, more cautious, waited with the understanding that some names commanded respect across every branch of military service. All units, maintain distance. Do not approach. Await further orders. Brooks studied the file more carefully, reading between the lines of heavily redacted information. The few details that weren't classified painted a picture of a man who'd served without recognition, whose sacrifices had been unmarked by bureaucracy. The girl below wasn't just a trespasser. She was the living legacy of someone whose shadow still protected those he'd left behind. She's not on any watch lists, Brooks reported. No criminal record, no security flags. But she's under protection we didn't even know existed. What kind of protection? Rodriguez asked. The kind that doesn't get written down anywhere. Through their thermal imaging, they watched her stand slowly and begin walking toward the valley's northern exit. Her pace never changed, never showed signs of fatigue or stress. She moved like someone who'd been trained by the best, carrying herself with the same controlled confidence that had made her father legendary among special operations personnel. Look at her gait, Rodriguez observed. That's not natural movement. That's learned behavior. The implications hit them both at the same time. The girl hadn't just inherited her father's genes. She'd inherited his training, his knowledge, his understanding of terrain and tactics. The restricted zone wasn't foreign territory to her. It was home ground, a place where she'd learned skills that most people couldn't imagine. Command, recommend we maintain current overwatch but do not interfere, Rodriguez reported. This individual has more right to be here than any of us. The response came back immediately. Understood. New orders. Observe only. Do not engage. Do not approach. Maintain overwatch at maximum distance. Rodriguez felt a profound shift in the atmosphere aboard his aircraft. They were no longer conducting a pursuit. They had become witnesses to something larger than military. Protocol, something that transcended standard operating procedures. The girl walking across the valley floor below wasn't just carrying her father's memory. She was carrying his legacy, protected by the silent understanding of those who knew what his sacrifice had meant. Master Sergeant Tom Williams had been monitoring tactical operations for 15 years, but something about the target's movement pattern triggered a recognition that went deeper than professional training. He stepped closer to the main display screen at ground command, his weathered face creasing with concentration as he studied the enhanced footage. Zoom in on her gait, he said quietly to the drone operator beside him. The technician adjusted. The feed, focusing on the girl's distinctive walking pattern as she navigated the rocky terrain. Left heel slightly lighter, shoulders perfectly square, arms moving in perfect symmetry. It was a movement pattern that spoke of years of specialized training, muscle memory developed through countless hours of practice. You recognize it? Asked the young technician. Williams was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the screen. Yeah, that's how he walked. Controlled, always forward, like nothing behind him was worth looking back at. You knew her father? We all did, but nobody admitted it. The truth began to emerge as they cross-referenced the restricted zone coordinates with historical military records. The land she was moving across wasn't just any training area. It had been his personal training ground, years ago, before the official military had acquired the property. Operator 001 had used these valleys and ridges to train select personnel in advanced survival techniques. The terrain offered every conceivable challenge. Desert survival, mountain warfare, urban combat simulations in the abandoned structures. It was a place where legends were made and secrets were kept, where the most elite operators in the world had come to learn techniques that would keep them alive in impossible situations. The area was declared off-limits not for safety reasons. Williams explained to the gathering crowd of technicians and officers. It was preserved out of respect. After he was killed in action, Command decided to keep it untouched. No training exercises, no development, no access. The drone operator looked up from his controls. She wasn't trespassing. No, Williams said softly. She was returning. The enhanced imagery showed her moving toward the specific location where her father had maintained a small memorial cache. Hidden beneath a natural rock formation was a time capsule of sorts, containing personal items from various operators who'd trained there over the years. It was a place where warriors came to remember fallen comrades, to honor sacrifices that would never be recorded in official documents. He used to bring her here when she was younger, Williams continued, his voice heavy with memory. Before deployments, after difficult missions, this place was their sanctuary. Through the surveillance feed, they watched her kneel beside the rock formation, her movements reverent and purposeful. She placed something small beside the rocks. Later analysis would reveal it was a photograph. She spent several minutes at the site, performing whatever ritual had brought her across miles of desert terrain in the middle of the night. She's not lost, Williams said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's remembering. The revelation changed everything. This wasn't an unauthorized intrusion. It was a pilgrimage, the daughter of a fallen warrior returning to honor his memory in the only way she knew how. The restricted zone wasn't just military property to her. It was hallowed ground, a place where her father's legacy lived on in ways that no official record could capture. Command, recommend we maintain current overwatch but do not interfere, Williams advised through the radio. She has more right to be here than any of us. The response came back immediately, weighted with understanding. Understood. All units maintain distance. This is now a memorial observation. Through their thermal imaging, they watched her complete her ritual and begin walking toward the valley's northern exit. Her pace remained steady, unhurried, as if the 3 military helicopters overhead were merely clouds drifting across the desert sky. She moved with the same unshakable composure her father had possessed, the same quiet confidence that had made him legendary among those who knew his true story. The girl had never looked up at the circling aircraft, never acknowledged their presence with a wave or gesture. But she knew they were there, had probably known from the moment they'd launched from base. She carried her father's training, his understanding of tactics and terrain, his ability to move through hostile territory with the calm assurance of someone who belonged. Williams watched until she disappeared into the pine forest beyond the training grounds, carrying her father's memory into the darkness. Some traditions ran deeper than official regulations. Some legacies commanded respect that no rank or authority could override. The girl had come to pay her respects, and they had become witnesses to something that transcended military protocol. Colonel Martinez had spent 32 years in military service, rising through the ranks from enlisted soldier to senior officer. He'd commanded operations in hostile territory, made decisions that affected thousands of lives, and handled classified situations that would never see the light of day. But as he stood in the tactical command center, listening to the reports from the field, he knew he was facing something unprecedented. The wall-mounted displays showed feeds from all 3 helicopters, their thermal imaging systems tracking the lone figure as she moved steadily across the valley floor. Intelligence reports flowed across multiple screens, building a picture that defied standard protocols and challenged every assumption about unauthorized intrusions into restricted airspace. "Sir, we have confirmation," the intelligence officer reported, his voice careful and measured. Target is the daughter of Operator 001, call sign Stonefield. The file is heavily classified, but the relationship is verified. Martinez felt the weight of that name settle over the command center like a heavy blanket. Every officer in the room knew the legend, even if they'd never spoken about it openly. Stonefield had been the kind of operator whose existence was whispered about in secure facilities, whose methods were studied but never documented, whose legacy lived on in the skills he passed down to others. "What's her status?" Martinez asked. "No criminal record, no security flags. She's been under unofficial protection since her father's death. The kind of protection that doesn't appear in any official documentation." Martinez studied the tactical displays, watching the girl's steady progress across terrain that would challenge experienced soldiers. Her movement pattern spoke of training that went beyond standard military education, techniques that were passed down through personal instruction rather than formal coursework. "She's heading toward the memorial site," Master Sergeant Williams reported from his monitoring station, the location where her father maintained a cache for operators who trained in the area. Martinez nodded slowly. He'd heard rumors about the memorial cache, personal items left by warriors who'd served without recognition, mementos that honored sacrifices unmarked by bureaucracy. It was the kind of tradition that existed in the shadows of official military structure, maintained by those who understood that some stories were too important to be forgotten. "All units, this is command," Martinez said into his radio. "New orders. Observe only. Do not engage. Do not approach. Maintain overwatch at maximum distance." The acknowledgments came back immediately from all three helicopters. Martinez could hear the relief in the pilots' voices, the understanding that they were no longer conducting a pursuit, but providing an honor guard for someone who'd inherited more than just genes. "Sir," the intelligence officer said quietly, "there's something else. The restricted zone coordinates match her father's former training area. This land was his personal facility before the military acquired it." Martinez felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. The girl wasn't trespassing on military property. She was returning to a place that had been her father's sanctuary, a location where elite operators had come to learn techniques that would keep them alive in impossible situations. "She's not unauthorized," Martinez realized. "She's family." The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. The restricted zone had been preserved out of respect for fallen warriors, maintained as an unofficial memorial to those who'd served without recognition. The girl had every right to be there, perhaps more right than any of them. "Update the incident report," Martinez instructed. "This is now classified as a memorial observation, not an unauthorized intrusion. All personnel are to maintain strict confidentiality about this operation." Through the surveillance feeds, they watched her complete whatever ritual had brought her across miles of desert terrain. She knelt beside the rock formation, placed something small among the memorial items, then spent several minutes in silent communion with memories that belonged to a world beyond official documentation. Martinez had seen enough classified operations to understand that some stories were too important to be reduced to paperwork. The girl represented something that transcended military protocol, a living connection to sacrifices that would never be recorded in official histories. "She's moving toward the exit," Williams reported, maintaining steady pace, no signs of distress. Martinez watched the thermal displays as the girl began her walk toward the valley's northern boundary. Her movements remained calm and purposeful, showing no acknowledgement of the three military helicopters providing overwatch. She walked with the same controlled confidence her father had possessed, carrying his legacy into the darkness. "Stand down when she clears the restricted zone," Martinez ordered. "This operation is concluded." The colonel remained in the command center long after the helicopters had returned to base, staring at the empty displays and thinking about the girl who'd walked through restricted airspace protected by a reputation that extended beyond death. Some names carried more weight than rank. Some legacies commanded respect that no official authority could override. He would file a report, carefully worded to protect the truth while satisfying bureaucratic requirements. But the real story would live on in the silence of those who understood what the girl's pilgrimage had represented. A reminder that the most important memorials were often the ones that existed only in the hearts of those who knew what sacrifice truly meant. 3 days after the incident, a maintenance crew discovered something that would change how everyone understood what had happened in the valley. During a routine inspection of the abandoned training facility, they found a photograph carefully placed under a protective rock near the memorial cache where operators had left personal mementos over the years. The image showed a young girl standing beside a tall man in combat gear, his arm around her shoulder. Both were smiling, a rare, genuine moment of happiness captured between deployments. The girl in the photo was unmistakably the same person who'd walked across the restricted zone, though several years younger. The man beside her carried himself with the quiet confidence that belonged to elite operators, warriors who'd served without recognition. On the back of the photograph, written in precise handwriting, were 4 words: "Not lost, just remembering." Master Sergeant Williams held the photograph carefully, studying the faces of father and daughter frozen in time. He'd been the one to find it during his final inspection before retirement, and he understood its significance in ways that couldn't be explained in official reports. She wasn't running from anything, Williams told his replacement, a young sergeant who'd been briefed on the incident. She was running toward something, toward a connection that death couldn't break. The photograph was quietly filed away in the facility's archive, joining other unofficial memorials to those who'd served without recognition. No reports were filed about its discovery. No questions were asked about why a young girl had risked crossing miles of restricted desert terrain to leave a single image at a memorial site. But the story spread through unofficial channels, whispered conversations in secure facilities, shared understanding among those who knew what certain call signs represented. The girl had become a legend in her own right, the daughter who'd honored her father's memory by walking through the valley where he'd trained the best of the best. Captain Rodriguez, now promoted to major, never forgot the afternoon when 3 helicopters had been turned back by the ghost of a dead operator's legacy. He kept a copy of the incident report, carefully redacted to protect classified information, but containing enough truth to remind him that some things were more powerful than military authority. Lieutenant Brooks transferred to a different unit, but he carried the memory of the girl who'd walked through restricted airspace like she owned it. Late at night, he would wonder about the training she'd received, the skills passed down from father to daughter, the legacy that protected her even in death. The valley remained off-limits to training exercises, officially designated as environmentally sensitive terrain. But those who knew the truth understood it was really preserved as a monument to warriors who'd served without recognition, protected by the understanding that some legacies transcended official documentation. Occasionally, maintenance crews would find small items left at the memorial site, wildflowers that didn't grow naturally in the desert, stones arranged in patterns that resembled military formations, messages written in code that only special operations personnel would recognize. The girl had never officially returned, but her presence lingered in the careful tributes left for those who'd given everything for missions that would never be acknowledged. Colonel Martinez included the incident in his final report before retirement, documenting it as a successful resolution of an unauthorized intrusion without acknowledging the deeper truth. He'd learned that some stories were too important to be reduced to paperwork, that the most significant operations were often the ones that existed only in the memories of those who participated. The restricted zone continued to hold its secrets, a place where legends lived on in the silence of those who understood what sacrifice truly meant. The girl had walked through military airspace protected by her father's reputation, honored his memory through actions that spoke louder than words, and reminded everyone who witnessed her pilgrimage that some bonds were stronger than death. Years later, when new personnel were assigned to monitor the area, they would be briefed on the incident in carefully neutral terms. But the older soldiers would tell them the real story, the legend of the girl who'd crossed the valley carrying her father's legacy, protected by the understanding that some names commanded respect across every branch of military service. The photograph remained in the archive, a testament to the connection between father and daughter, warrior and legacy, memory and honor. It served as a reminder that the most important tributes were often the ones that existed beyond official recognition, carried forward by those who understood that some stories were too powerful to be forgotten. 6 months after the incident, the ripple effects of that night in the valley had spread through the military community in ways that couldn't be measured in official reports. The story of the girl who'd walked through restricted airspace, protected by her father's legacy, had become the kind of legend that lived in the spaces between official documentation and whispered truth. Major Rodriguez found himself assigned to a new position at the Pentagon, a promotion that came with responsibilities he hadn't expected. During his first briefing, he was introduced to a program that existed in the shadows of official military structure, the Legacy Protection Initiative. It was a classified operation designed to safeguard the families of fallen operators whose service had been too sensitive for public recognition. The Stonefield incident opened some eyes, his new commanding officer explained during a private meeting. We realized we had families out there who inherited more than just grief. They inherited skills, knowledge, and connections that could make them targets or assets, depending on how we handled the situation. Rodriguez learned that the girl's midnight pilgrimage had triggered a comprehensive review of how the military treated the families of classified operators. Her father's training had been passed down through personal instruction, creating a civilian with capabilities that most people couldn't imagine. The question was whether to view her as a security risk or a valuable resource. She's not the only one, his commanding officer continued. There are others out there, sons and daughters of operators who died in missions that never officially happened. They carry their parents' skills, their knowledge, their understanding of techniques that aren't taught in any manual. Rodriguez thought about the girl's perfect evasion patterns, her intimate knowledge of helicopter pursuit tactics, her ability to move through hostile terrain with the confidence of someone who belonged. She represented a new category of individual that existing protocols weren't designed to handle. Meanwhile, at Fort Carson, the abandoned training facility had been quietly redesignated as a memorial preserve. The change happened without fanfare, buried in routine administrative updates, but it represented a fundamental shift in how the military acknowledged the sacrifices of those who'd served without recognition. Lieutenant Brooks, now Captain Brooks, had been assigned to oversee the memorial preserve's security. His new position came with responsibilities that went beyond standard military protocol. He was tasked with ensuring that families of fallen operators could visit the site safely, without triggering the kind of massive response that had characterized the initial incident. We're creating a new category of access, Brooks explained, to his security team. Some people have earned the right to be here through sacrifice that can't be documented in standard files. Our job is to recognize that right while maintaining operational security. The preserve had become a place where unofficial traditions could continue, where families could honor fallen warriors without triggering security alerts. It was a solution that acknowledged the reality that some legacies ran deeper than official regulations, that some bonds transcended bureaucratic boundaries. Master Sergeant Williams had used his retirement to establish an informal network of veterans who understood the importance of protecting these family connections. He'd become a liaison between military command and the relatives of fallen operators, helping to ensure that grief didn't become a security risk and that honor could be maintained without compromising classified operations. These families didn't choose to inherit these skills, Williams explained to a gathering of senior officers. But they have them, and pretending otherwise doesn't serve anyone's interests. We need to find ways to honor their connections while keeping everyone safe. The girl herself had never been contacted directly by military personnel, but she'd become aware that her midnight journey had created changes in how the system worked. Through unofficial channels, she'd learned that other families were now able to visit memorial sites without triggering massive security responses. Colonel Martinez, in his final months before retirement, had overseen the development of new protocols that balanced security requirements with respect for family bonds. The Stonefield incident had taught him that some situations couldn't be handled through standard procedures, that the most important decisions often involved understanding what couldn't be written in official reports. We learned that legacy is a form of security clearance, Martinez told his successor. Some people have earned access through sacrifice that goes beyond standard vetting procedures. Our job is to recognize that access while maintaining operational integrity. The valley remained a protected space, but it had become something more than a restricted zone. It was a place where memory and honor intersected, where the families of fallen warriors could maintain connections that transcended official documentation. The girl's photograph still rested in the archive, but it was no longer alone. Other families had begun leaving their own tributes, their own connections to warriors who'd served without recognition. The memorial cache had grown into something larger, a testament to sacrifices that would never be recorded in official histories, but would never be forgotten by those who understood their true value. 2 years after the incident, the valley had become something that existed beyond official military designation. The Memorial Preserve served as a bridge between the world of classified operations and the families, who'd inherited more than just grief from fallen warriors. It was a place where a legacy lived on in ways that no bureaucracy could document or control. The girl, now 18 and preparing for college, had never spoken publicly about her midnight journey across the restricted zone, but she'd become aware that her actions had created ripples that extended far beyond a single night in the New Mexico desert. Through unofficial channels, she'd learned that other families were now able to honor their fallen relatives without triggering massive security responses. She'd received a letter, unmarked and delivered through channels that couldn't be traced, from someone who identified himself only as a friend of her father's. The message was brief, but carried weight that official documents couldn't match. He would be proud of what you've accomplished. The path you walked that night opened doors for others who needed to find their way home. Major Rodriguez had settled into his new role at the Pentagon, overseeing a program that existed in the spaces between official military structure and human reality. The Legacy Protection Initiative had grown to encompass families across all branches of service, creating a network of support that honored connections while maintaining operational security. We've learned that grief and honor don't follow standard protocols, Rodriguez explained to a congressional briefing committee. Some families inherit skills, knowledge, and connections that make them unique assets. Our job is to recognize that inheritance while ensuring everyone's safety. The program had developed new approaches to handling situations that couldn't be addressed through standard procedures. Families of fallen operators were provided with counseling, support, and when necessary, protection that acknowledged their unique circumstances. It was a solution that recognized the reality that some legacies ran deeper than official regulations. Captain Brooks had transformed the memorial preserve into something that served multiple purposes. It remained a restricted zone for standard military operations, but it had become a place where families could maintain connections that transcended bureaucratic boundaries. The facility hosted regular memorial services, carefully managed to ensure security while honoring the sacrifices of those who'd served without recognition. This place has become what it was always meant to be, Brooks told a gathering of military families, a space where honor lives on, where connections that death couldn't break can be maintained and celebrated. The preserve had attracted attention from military historians, psychologists, and policy experts who were studying how institutions could better support the families of classified operators. The lessons learned from the Stonefield incident had implications that extended far beyond a single case, offering insights into how organizations could balance security requirements with human needs. Master Sergeant Williams had established a foundation that provided support to families of fallen operators, connecting them with resources and each other. The network had grown to include hundreds of families across the country, creating a community that understood the unique challenges of inheriting a legacy that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. These families share something that most people can't understand, Williams explained to a gathering of veteran service organizations. They've inherited skills, knowledge, and connections that came at a tremendous cost. They deserve support that acknowledges their sacrifice while respecting their privacy. The girl had chosen to attend college on the East Coast, pursuing a degree in international relations with a focus on conflict resolution. Her professors had no idea that their student carried training that went beyond standard academic preparation, that she'd learned lessons from someone whose methods were studied, but never documented. But she carried her father's legacy in ways that extended beyond specialized skills. She'd learned the importance of honor, sacrifice, and the connections that bound warriors together across time and distance. Her midnight journey had been about more than visiting a memorial site. It had been about claiming her place in a tradition that transcended official documentation. The valley continued to hold its secrets, but they were secrets shared among those who understood their value. The memorial cache had grown into something larger, a collection of tributes that told stories too important to be forgotten. Photographs, letters, personal items left by families who'd found their way to a place where grief could transform into honor. On quiet nights, when the desert wind whispered through the canyon walls, maintenance crews would sometimes find new additions to the memorial. Wildflowers that didn't grow naturally in the high desert, arranged with military precision. Stones placed in patterns that resembled tactical formations. Messages written in codes that only special operations personnel would recognize. The girl had never returned officially, but her presence lingered in the careful tributes left for those who'd given everything for missions that would never be acknowledged. She'd shown others that some traditions were too important to be abandoned, that honor could be maintained even when recognition was impossible. Colonel Martinez, now retired, but still consulted on matters involving classified operations, had written a book about leadership that never mentioned the Stonefield incident directly. But those who knew the story could read between the lines, understanding the references to situations where standard protocols had to yield to deeper truths. The most important lessons I learned in 32 years of service, Martinez wrote in his conclusion, came from understanding that some things are more powerful than military authority. Legacy, honor, and the bonds between warriors transcend official documentation. Sometimes, the greatest acts of leadership involve recognizing when to step back and let tradition guide the way forward. The photograph in the archive had been joined by others, creating a gallery of connections that existed beyond official recognition. Each image told a story of sacrifice, love, and the passing of traditions from one generation to the next. The served as reminders that the most important battles were often fought in the spaces between official documentation and human reality. Years later, when military historians studied the evolution of support systems for classified operators' families, the Stonefield incident would be recognized as a turning point. It had demonstrated that institutions could adapt to acknowledge human connections without compromising security, that honor and operational requirements weren't mutually exclusive. The girl's midnight journey had become more than a personal pilgrimage. It had opened the path for others who needed to find their way home, who carried legacies that couldn't be publicly acknowledged but were too important to be forgotten. She'd walked across that valley carrying her father's memory, but she'd emerged carrying something larger. The understanding that some traditions were worth preserving, no matter the cost. The 3 Black Hawk helicopters that had circled overhead. That night had been recalled not by superior orders, but by the recognition that they were witnessing something sacred. The pilots had learned that some names commanded respect that transcended rank, that some stories were too important to be interrupted by protocol. In the end, the valley stood as a testament to the idea that honor could exist in the spaces between official recognition and human memory. The girl had walked through restricted airspace protected by her father's reputation, but she'd left behind something even more powerful. Proof that legacy was stronger than bureaucracy, that love could survive even the most classified circumstances. The Memorial Preserve continued to serve families who needed a place to honor their fallen warriors, a space where grief could transform into something larger. It stood as evidence that some institutions could learn, adapt, and find ways to serve human needs while maintaining their essential functions. The story of the girl who'd crossed the valley would be told in whispered conversations for years to come, a legend that lived in the spaces between official documentation and shared understanding. It served as a reminder that the most important truths were often the ones that couldn't be written down, carried forward by those who understood that some bonds were stronger than death itself. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.